WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. And, this might not be the most positive one. Luke Jones is joining me. Been a little while since we got together, man. I do miss sort of talking about who Buck had in the seventh inning, of the game last night, or Machado hitting one out, or, hey, the Orioles, their magic number is something, and we had all that. And Luke, I know you're not looking at me, and it's going to make the segment a lot better because I've busted out the orange giveaway hat from, 2000 and something that my wife had, and my hair is very, very like the hair you would buy in one of the hats like these, but this is my real hair. And once again, memo to you, Marvin Lewis, I do not dye my hair. So, you've seen Marvin accuse me of this, so this is I couldn't dye this much hair, so this is the real deal. Luke, I'm wearing my baseball gear and my I have Delusions of Grandeur shirt, and I do. And at some point I'll shave and I'll clean up and I'll figure this all out with the baseball thing. But after 30 years, watching them now fight in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a national crisis, in the middle of this, over money, if you're fighting over the health of the players and should they be playing baseball in the middle of a pandemic, I would probably argue all along this is a bad idea, right? Like, should they play or should they not play from a fundamental standpoint of whether it's good for them, their players, COVID, the spirit of the country, all of that, whether it's good for their business, forget all of that. Let's just go to health. I'm not sure they should play. So everything that will happen after that will sort of be hypocritical for me, right? Because I'm going to say, how dare they not get along? How dare they not figure this out? How dare they do this and not play? They have an incredible opportunity, as we've talked about many times, to capture some of the mojo and the spirit of the country by being the thing that's playing the way golf is doing this experiment, and wrestling. We've talked about that at length, and you and me and Dennis have talked about it. I'm not rational on this, I guess, because I don't think sending a John Angelos memo out on Oriole letterhead on Twitter the way every white owner in America has done in the last 72 hours, including, Bob Kraft and Shad Khan, and who's not white, by the way, but who gave Donald Trump $1 million, and now, and the knee and Kaepernick. And I know you weren't happy with me probably in London that day when I took a knee, and, and we had an honest debate about it, and it was cool, and we said we can still be friends on Tuesday. There were a lot of people that didn't want to be my friend on Tuesday. So I'm amazed by all of this, but I really am amazed that baseball has interjected itself into a conversation of greed in the middle of this. That to me, is an incredible thing. It really is. It's mind-numbing.
Yeah, it is, but I'll also say I'm not remotely surprised. and let's be clear, there are a couple things that I think we all need to be clear about if we're going to have not saying there isn't disdain, there isn't plenty of reason to be angry and ticked off and disillusioned and say, here we go again with, a sport that is just littered with labor wars throughout its history. But there are a couple things I think that do need to be acknowledged here. One, and I'm going to start with this, comparing it to the NBA or the NHL is apples to oranges right now. You're talking about two sports that finished 80 to 85% of their regular season with normal revenue. They are putting their players in a bubble for a shorter period of time with a diminishing number of teams as you get into the playoffs, and they're quarantining. Both sports are doing that. That's great. It's good to see. Hopefully it works out. But comparing Major League Baseball and say, well, the NBA's figuring it out, the NHL's figuring it out, the MLB and the players have been a victim of timing here in terms of the pandemic compared to their season, compared to the other sports. And that's why I think...
Well, they're also in a bad vibe to begin with, right?
Sure.
This would not... negotiating right now was in no one's best interest, so no one really thought about it.
No question about it, and we'll get to that part in a second. And that's why I also would throw some caution before we just assume the NFL is going to go on and things are going to be perfectly peachy. Yes, they just signed a new collective bargaining agreement in March, and you would hope from a fan perspective that has built up some goodwill to try to figure this thing out. But NFL revenues are going to be altered pretty drastically if fans are not allowed to attend or if you have a much more reduced capacity. Now, it might not be as pronounced for the NFL as Major League Baseball because of how much bigger the percent of revenue is generated by the national television package, but I'll just throw that caution out there. So we get that out of the way. The other thing I think we do need to be careful about, and I think what you just alluded to, it's nearly impossible to separate the health piece from the financial piece here because you have players who are taking inherent risk, on-field risk, practical risk, more so than financial fallout that owners, players, and everyone else tied to Major League Baseball are connected to. I think we need to be careful as far as the narrative of being able to own the space first or to come back first when we're moving at such a snail's pace just to get back to everyday aspects of our lives, like, I don't know, visiting our family members or going back to work. So I think we need to be careful with those aspects of the argument because I think those aspects of the argument really cloud the real issues at work here, which is you have two sides who did not trust each other before anyone had ever heard of the coronavirus. We have a current collective bargaining agreement that the players have to wear as much as the owners are greedy. When it was signed, the players, they conceded a lot. They gave up a lot of power. Anyone who has followed the history of labor relations with the four major professional sports here in America have always said that the baseball union was the strongest of the four. But you look at what they conceded in the last CBA, in the name of having an extra seat on the bus for spring training and different amenities like that really had no value whatsoever.
They negotiated like children.
They
negotiated like they were on the student council looking to sneak beer into the dance. You know what I mean? Literally.
About it. So that's where, I do point at the players' union and say, guys, are you really surprised that this is happening now when you didn't take any kind of a stand? And worse than taking a stand, you gave ground in a sport where the Players Association has always had such strength. Regardless of public perception, because we know sports work stoppages.
Well, it's how they got rich. I mean, it's how
sides with the owners. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. And
it's how Roberto Clemente never made a nickel, and Willie Stargell made some money. You know what I mean? Like literally.
No question. No question. So so from that standpoint, that's where I kind of do look at the player side and say, well, you kind of had this coming in a way. Now that said,
what about the fans, man?
Well, sure, well, of course.
What about the cities that built stadiums for these people?
No question about it, but this is where I do go back to the owners now, and this is where I'm bristling seeing national reporters, try to play, and not that they're saying it's a 50-50 split in terms of blame, but trying to do this both sides thing. Take a look at any Major League Baseball owner and look at what Forbes or any, whatever financial resource you want to look at today appraises the value of their team compared to what any of these guys, whether they bought the team 5 years ago, whether they bought the team 10 years ago, whether they bought it 25 years ago, as in the case of, the Angelos family 27 years ago now at this point. And you just see the value of a franchise, how dramatically it appreciates. And here recently, again, going back to this current CBA and how, with the luxury tax threshold has essentially created, soft cap, hard cap, however you want to characterize it. It's clearly depressed salaries, and with analytics, even if these are sound decisions that have been made, we certainly haven't seen that free agent money to 30-somethings be redistributed to the 20-somethings.
Well, the owners have just basically said, here's the new science. Accept it. Yes.
So what you have all these issues that were very clear, and you and I, long before coronavirus ever came came to consume our lives over the last few months, we were talking about the potential for a work stoppage post-2021. So in that sense, none of this should be remotely surprising. It's very infuriating. There's no question about that. But I continue to look at the ownership side. And look, they're losing revenue. There's no question about that. We're into the start of June, and they haven't played a baseball game yet. I mean, everyone knows they are losing money. However, when we look at that in relation to money that's made in previous years, in relation to the franchises that will continue to appreciate in the future.
Well, especially if you take care of your little egg during the time of pandemic. You know what I mean?
No doubt. And that's where...
during the pandemic, you mow your lawn. You know what I mean? Like, you keep the house nice. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I think, this is where I'm so frustrated from the standpoint of, we've talked a lot about tanking over the last few years. Whether we're talking about it specifically here in Baltimore, even though
it says so on the front, it says Orioles. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
But even but just the general notion of it, we've talked so much about that in Major League Baseball in recent years, and the big part of that, it's like, okay, you're rebuilding and you're building a farm system and you're relying on the draft and the international market, and that's great. But don't tell me for a minute you're not happy about the fact that more money's going in your pocket in the process. So from that standpoint, you should have owners who, oh, by the way, are not opening their books, and we know they're not going to open their books, so we're supposed to take
we got a little bit of the
for it.
Braves books, right? You know what I mean? There's been enough out there to let everybody know how much is possible out there. And that's certainly where the Angelos family or whoever would own the Orioles, and we've talked at length about this, that they would see the next opportunity, whether that opportunity is housing and parking and a bar structure and a movie theater next to Camden Yards, right? Or whether that's in Nashville on a river or in Portland on a shore, whatever, that is where they want their franchises, in the same way that you and I pulled up into that parking lot in Foxborough in the middle of BFFE, and there's a mall, there's an avenue from the White Marsh there, and a place you can get a cheeseburger and watch a movie and get your nails done and whatever else. That baseball, that they're worried about all that. They don't want to fight with Manny Machado over whether he gets $15 million, $12 million, $30 million this year. But I am shocked that they've allowed this thing to fall out in the middle of a pandemic when I've got protests marching around my building. Where the orange TV con man is building gates around his castle with militiamen from Texas who guard prisons. I wake up every morning and seeing Americans getting beaten. And unemployment's the highest it's ever been in the history of the country. And we're going to wake up today and the baseball players are going to fight, and I'm going to wear this jersey, and I think about how much time and love and money and effort and airplanes and relationships and opening days and beers and girls and friends and grandmoms and Aunt Pat Gates, who left us dearly departed, and my father, who put me on a bus over G&A Coney Island hot dog to go out to Memorial Stadium, and Brooks Robinson and Cal Ripken and all that's been built for Mickey Mantle, all that's built all of this, Babe Ruth statues and sports legends museums that they put out of business, and this creepy old guy that bought the team here and just has just been a dark cloud of willful ignorance and lies and hiding and being abusive of everything he can abuse and polarizing to empty out the stadium. Now, after all of that, the whole collective thing is going to get together and decide in the second to last year of the lease here in the middle of a pandemic that they can't figure out how to divide their money. I mean, again, I'm going to continue to say what a hypocrite I am, which is I don't know that it's safe for them to play. I would still go back to, I don't know if I were a player with a wife with diabetes who's had cancer twice that I would want to bring it home, or that I wouldn't want to be able to hug my grandmother for 120 days if she were 82 years old. If I'm a baseball player that's already got $100 million in the bank. I mean, there's all sorts of factions working here on this, but the fact that they all can't get in a room and decide collectively this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, we can't fit the season in, we can't get enough agreement really amongst everybody because Ness is a 32-year-old millionaire and he just doesn't want to play. He just doesn't want to play for that amount of money $6 million's not enough for him. He's Roger Dorn. You know what I mean? Like, it's just he's not interested anymore. Adam Jones is over in Japan because he still loves playing and wanted to have that experience or whatever. But I don't know. There's so many things you could be offended about with the Orioles if you come from my angle and see what my eyes have seen and what this used to be when I bought this jersey in the summer of 92, 93. I bought this kind of, I wish I would have had the Camden Yards patch on it, the All-Star Game patch, because I think this predates this. I think I got this in like 92. So I've been wearing this for 28 years. And I'm just appalled. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'll go back to politics. I'll go back to the mayor thing. I'll go back to the election. I'll go back to race because I've been doing all that. This might be the only baseball conversation I'll have. Moeller would just beat me up too much if I get him on because he just thinks I'm completely wrong about everything because, he and the Orioles are family members. He will never not take the Orioles side on anything. And I know fans that are like that, but that is a very, very small subset of where this was, Luke, and you're a little younger than me, but I remember this debate in 1981 in the newspaper when my father canceled Sporting News. I remember how, all during the 80s there was problems and drugs and all that stuff going on with baseball that led to Lords of the Realm. And I watched all this, and I talked 4 hours a day, every day on the radio as a young guy with much longer hair, but it is growing. About what the future of the city would be when there was no football team here, when there was no CFL team here, when the Orioles were the only game in town. I mean, I've seen how incredibly tragic this has been for this franchise in this city, in my community, in my neighborhood, literally where I live. I see how devastating it's been. And the Nationals are parading around with a trophy, right? And I've witnessed this, and I've written about this from my heart, from my soul, from my honor, of integrity, of truth, of adding up the money, adding up the lies, adding up the truths, adding up the stories, adding up the opinions. And I'm just appalled, man. And I'm out of the energy to I had the Free the Birds on the back of my shirt. If I spin that around, I could show everybody. I'm sure you know. But I had that kind of energy 14 years ago to try to make sure this never happened. I wanted this to be Fenway Park and Busch Stadium and, what the good part of baseball, not the Tampa Bay Rays and the Montreal Expos. And Ripken and I got into it 13 years ago now, about whether this would ever be the Expos. Luke, the most appalling part of this, like just of all of this, is that they're going to do this and nobody cares. Nobody cares. In 2006, when I did the Free the Birds thing and I wrote the book about my father, I said the opposite of love isn't hate. It really is indifference. It's just I'm going to move on to something else in my life because I'm 52 years old and because my last name's Aparicio, which is on the back of the jersey, and I'm wearing my number 11 and Uncle Louie and, all that stuff. It's truly unbelievable. It really is. And then next year, the conversation's going to be, how do we keep the baseball team here? Whether I'm the mayor, you're the mayor, Sheila's the mayor, Brandon's the mayor, Hogan's the governor, Trump's the president, Biden's the president. Next year, we're all collectively going to get together and decide whether this has any value anymore. Because we're going to have a gun held to our head one way or another for what we're going to give them or what someone else is going to give them in a city that has lost 25% of its economy in the last 90 days, and it already wasn't good. So I just think if I own the Orioles and there were any sort of leadership, and I know Bisciotti's been writing checks, and I know it's not his personality to come off the boat or back from Florida or the Bahamas or Severna Park or wherever he is, but somebody better step up and say, well, WTF. You know what I mean? WTF. So that's what I'm giving you today, with WTF hair in the middle of the pandemic with a mask on.
Yeah, I mean, some of what you speak, those problems are in other communities now, in other cities now. I think to bring it back to 2020, because everything that you just talked about.
Well, it's the history that leads me to be exasperated more than fiery angry.
Right.
I've done everything I can do about it. You know what I mean? I've warned people. I've written books. I've led marches. I've spoken truth. I've been banned. I've been threatened. I've been sued. I've had all of that happen. And yet I'm still wearing the jersey. It's still my last name. It's still what I stand for. It still says Baltimore on the front door, even when they refused to put Baltimore on the front door. When I bought this jersey, there were no Baltimore jerseys. I had to buy a Brooks Robinson 59 throwback to put on the wall. It did have a really cute bird on it that looked like this. But Luke, go ahead, man. I mean, I could monologue and I could write if I didn't want to hear from you. But, I'm just bearing my soul while I drink some Pizza John's,
That's not a bad place to drink and eat.
I'm venting on the radio.
Yeah, but a lot of what you said, I mean, we're not going to solve it the next 10, 15 minutes of conversation here locally, but to bring it back to Major League Baseball, with the Orioles being one of the 30 partners in Major League Baseball, I think what's really frustrating for me, and we haven't really touched on it, is these sides worked out a compromise in late March. They agreed to prorated pay at that point in time with the couple provisions. One, there was some upfront money. Two, the commissioner had the autonomy to set a number of games for a season. And three, and this is, national reporting, who's carrying water from whom, that kind of question always comes into it. But, this language that was allegedly in there about revisiting the prorated pay plan. But with that, the burden of proof needs to be on the owners then, right? Open up your books and show the players' union just how much you're losing, and maybe we'll play ball with you. But these harebrained schemes of having an 82-game season and then not paying players the prorated amount, but paying them markedly less than that, and trying to have this scale and talking about revenue sharing and basically asking for things, Nestor, that would be in a collective bargaining agreement, things that take a year or 18 months to negotiate in some cases. We're talking about, the owners wanting to change the economic system in the midst of a pandemic where, time isn't, they've had a little bit of time, but time really isn't on their side at this point.
I mean, you're getting into the middle of which side you're on, right? And
right.
I'm on the side of Baltimore is what I'm on. I'm on the side of the city.
But at the same time, to me, this comes down to labor. I mean, not every player in Major League Baseball is a millionaire, for example.
No doubt.
We're talking about lots of guys that, okay, they're making six figures, but guess what? They're not even going to make it to free agency. A lot of these guys aren't even going to make it to arbitration. They're not set for life. They're going to go and get jobs for and be regular citizens. Look, I'm not going to cry the blues for someone that's being paid $800,000 to play a baseball season. But when you look at what the owners are proposing,
well, they gutted the minor leagues kind of quietly, right?
Well, and that's the other thing, too, and this kind of comes back to what's so frustrating for me, and I mentioned the tanking aspect. We've talked about, I thought it was interesting that you brought up development around stadiums. You talked about Patriot Place up in Foxborough. You and I were in Cincinnati early in the 2018 season when the Ravens were playing the Bengals on a Thursday night, and all the shops and apartments between their baseball and
that beer was cold, wasn't it?
Yeah. But what does that take? When you have those things, it takes some investment, right? You have to build it in order for that to come to fruition. And that's what's frustrating for me, and I've talked about this so much with you over the last couple of years, talking about issues like in-market streaming blackouts persisting, talking about the disappearance of games on free TV. Not that 162 should be broadcast on WJZ. We're not in that model anymore. That's not what any team in any city is doing at this point. But the idea of putting Sunday afternoon games on free TV for those kids whose parents are my age and are cutting cable and satellite and are relying on streaming services at best. And that might be those kids' only way to watch a baseball game. And, now we're cutting and contracting minor league teams. So if you grow up in a community that's 4 hours away from the nearest Major League Baseball city, but that community's minor league team has been abandoned by its Major League affiliate, now that goes belly up. So all those kids who grew up in that area of the country who watch the whatever minor league team name you want to throw out there, they're not growing up as much of a fan of the game of baseball, and then when they move to a more suburban or a more urban area that does have a Major League Baseball team, they're less likely to support it and follow it and become a fan. So what I'm talking about here is baseball is, and when I say baseball, I mean the owners here more specifically. I very much put the blame on the owners at this point because they're the ones who are going to continue to be fine in the long run. I don't think baseball is going to die if they don't play in 2020 in the same way that it didn't die from the strike that wiped out the World Series for the first time in 90 years back in 1994. But it certainly can harm it, and it can harm it exponentially over time, and you might not see it in 2021 or 2025, but the people that you continue to alienate and the younger people that are fans that you could grow and birth 20 years from now, they're not going to give a damn about baseball. And that's a problem. And it's great for guys like you and me who grew up loving the sport, but I can tell you right now, even as a fifth-grade teacher a decade ago, there weren't a ton of kids in my classes that liked baseball. There were certainly kids who played Little League, and there were kids into it. It wasn't.
And Mr. Jones is always trying to get a kid interested, right? I mean, the kids that were interested, I'm sure you talk baseball with those kids.
Sure. And there were kids interested, but it wasn't as many as you'd like if you're someone who truly loves the game. I've said this a lot to people in my
you had a home
circle.
Run fence in your neighborhood, too. How could you not sell kid that?
Absolutely. But I've said this a lot to people in my inner circle over the last several weeks, watching these negotiations, non-negotiations, pandering to the media, all the different things that we've seen play out
Techniques,
here.
as they have.
Right. I've said this a lot. I continue to love baseball as much as I ever have, and that doesn't change. I had a catch with my brother-in-law a few weeks ago.
Nice.
One of the brightest, happiest moments I've had.
How did your arm feel the next day? Does it feel different?
It was sore. It was the first time I played some legitimate
Then you did it right. Good.
But you know what? From as far as my sports soul, look, we know sports is a very small part of everything that's going on in the world now. But as far as the sports soul that I haven't been happier over the last 3 months than having a catch and throwing the ball around and throwing knucklers like I did when I was 15 years old and all of that. I continue to love baseball as much as I ever have. I continue to despise Major League Baseball more and more and more and more, and that's what's incredibly frustrating here. And look, I don't have the perfect solution here. Again, we're talking about an unprecedented pandemic here that the country hasn't seen anything remotely like this in, 100 years. So to sit here and say that I have the perfect solution for Major League Baseball, I'd be disingenuous and too much of a know-it-all to say that. But, I know they came up with an agreement in late March. They clearly had a compromise then on prorated pay. Whether it's going to be 50 games or 82 games, or maybe you meet somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 games. And, the legitimacy of 82 games or 50 games, I mean, I've seen people write about that. I think that's kind of a weird argument. 82 games isn't a legitimate season in the way that we think of normal Major League Baseball, but these aren't normal times. So I'm not nearly as hung up about the length of the season.
Well, we always said they played too many anyway.
What I think you could do is compromise on a number of games with prorated pay, and then let's start focusing on other issues and other ways that you can grow revenue, like expanded playoffs, like the idea that you're not telling me right now that ESPN and FS1 and some of the other sports networks that really cover sports that are hurting right now as more people cut the cord because there are no live sports on cable TV right now. You're telling me you couldn't work out ways to add a little bit to the national television package and sweeten the pot a little bit there? Not at your normal rates, but something's better than nothing, right? So there are ways to move past the salary and the pay structure dispute here, and then to focus on other ways to grow revenue in the interim and come up with some other exhibition type events that maybe you even have in the off season, and home run derbies and charitable tie-ins and different things like that. There are ways to recoup some of that lost revenue. I'm not going to say it's going to make anyone whole, but sorry if I'm not going to cry the blues for billionaires who bought teams at a fraction of what they're valued now, and we'll continue to appreciate over time. And that's like I said, I don't think baseball is going to die in the way that people said it was going to die in 1994, or the way that you can go back and find contemporary writing from 100 years ago talking about people being concerned about the future of baseball. I don't think it's going to die in that way, but you better start caring about it, the growth of it, or over a long period of time, it's going to continue to.
Well, they would say that's what the World Baseball Classic was. But, I mean, in general, when they make these decisions, it's a bunch of old white men getting together in what I've been told by everyone, especially when I did 30 ballparks in 30 days, was silos, right? The left doesn't talk to the right, and the middle doesn't talk, and the old don't talk to the new, and there really is no leadership behind beyond what Buddy could get done. And Rob Manfred, you want to see strength in leadership. You want to see things. They're gonna have the DH in a season where in the National League where they're not gonna play a season. So even the progress they make, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it's been that way for a long time.
Rob Manfred's a labor guy, so he's gonna. I mean, he works for the 30 owners. He's taking a hard stance. They're all about the bottom line. And look, it's a business. I think we all need to, as fans, recognize that, and we all do, because we've paid the price.
And I think as a human being, they should realize that I'm a customer,
sure,
not a sheep.
Sure.
And the business model here for 29 years with the Angeles family has been cheap. You came in, you love Brooks, you love Boog, come on back. You love Cakes, we'll put them on TV. You love Elrod until you don't anymore, and and we'll just sell on 1966. And I'm just blown away by the. For 30 years, how lazy it's been and how terrible it's been, and how never once. People ask me for 14 years, have they ever called you and tried to make nice with you? And I'm like, no, it's not who they are. They've never tried to call anybody and make nice. I mean, I guess they made nice with Brooks in the end, right? And they're writing him a check, but it wasn't about making nice. I mean, they're paying Brooks, they're paying Eddie, and God bless them. God, good. Right. I'm glad they're giving the money to them. But as opposed to Xavier Hernandez or whatever, as opposed to Aubrey Huff. So yeah, I only thing I've seen them do in 90 days. I saw the Angelos tweet last week. I saw the Zoom that they had with a bunch of the legends. I don't really, I didn't watch it, but I saw it. And I literally, and the stuff certainly around Trey Mancini,
sure,
which has been really quiet for a month or two, 45 days, whatever it's been now. But I follow him on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, and I'm always sort of waiting for something cool and brilliant and interesting and something that I would engage with in some way. And now the last 2 or 3 weeks has all been this, which I've been far too engaged with for 30 years here.
Sure.
Far more engaged with labor discord than I have been with pennant races over 30 years of my doing this.
What has and my frustration for this was felt long before this happened, is such a laser focus on the bottom line in the present without any meaningful regard for growing the game. And I mean, it perverbiates. It's throughout the game, even in things as simple as the unwritten rules and bat flips and things that, frankly, young people get more excited about. Look, I don't want it to become a mockery. I don't want the game to be completely.
You don't want end zone dances?
I don't want it to be completely changed to the point that it's unrecognizable by any stretch.
You don't want rockets to go off and have a guy dancing to the Ray Lewis song all the way around the bases. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
that's the indoor soccer model. That's the NBA model. The wag your finger and all. All of that.
Well, and there's a middle ground here, and even time of game. For me, it's not time of game as much as it's pace of play and action within the game. I have watched plenty of baseball games that went 3.5 hours that were absolutely a ball because the action was good. On the flip side, I've been to 2.5-hour games where it's
there were too many pickoff plays.
Good pitching, but not dominant pitching, and it's kind of there are things that can be done, but again, we're so caught up in the short term and the present and the past that the vision isn't there for the future. And again, that point has just been completely augmented by what they're dealing with now, which, as I mentioned at the start of our discussion, is a very challenging position to be in. Major League Baseball faced the worst of it from a timing standpoint.
Well, you never think this was going to be easy. I didn't think it was going to be easy, but
exactly.
I think in a time of a pandemic, you guys will figure it out.
Yeah, but like I said, I mean, NBA and NHL, if the pandemic had started in October, I'm guessing that would have gone a lot more.
They would just be planning for September the way the NFL is.
Yeah, and in the case of
it's broken well for the NFL as long as COVID doesn't come back, right?
And that's the other thing too here, and that's where as much
and the NFL's way on the wrong side of the Kaepernick thing, and we'll talk about that next week.
Sure, well, there'll be plenty of time to talk about that, but I think that's where as angry as and frustrated as I am because I love baseball, that's where I haven't really been comparing it to the other sports because we still don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Major League Baseball might not play a season, and guess what? That might end up being the best possible outcome because heaven forbid if something goes terribly wrong with one of the other sports starting up. Or if it would happen in baseball. Whatever.
Well, I like that you bring it back to the beginning, which was, I don't think they should play anyway. But
and look, I'm not of the opinion that they shouldn't, but I think that's, baseball.
I don't know what the upside of the 50 or 60 game season is, other than trying to make money,
50
right?
Or 60 games is better than no games at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, we all miss sports. If it can be done in a way that is reasonably safe, which I think it can. I'm not going to say it will, or I'm not 100%.
But I don't want to hear that it needs to be economically feasible when there's $1 billion for you to fight over.
But it does need to be economically feasible for the players. They're the ones taking on the risk.
I agree, but I don't want to hear that. I can't, as the customer, I can't hear that you're not playing.
We're giving in to some of the same issues that we're talking about right now as a society where,
I'm not going to judge their negotiation, though, Luke. You know what I mean? I'm literally I'm too old to do that at this point to say here's a side or there's a side.
Okay,
the side is they have to figure it out.
But you also know that deals don't just happen.
I also know it's not an easy deal. I'm not disputing any of that.
Sure.
I'm just saying if you care about doing it.
If you're going to ask me as far as blame, I mean, this is on the owners. The players agreed to prorated pay back in late March. Where's the burden of proof that they've extended to the players to truly show how hurting they are financially? You want to open up your books and show all that and really show how much financial damage you're really taking in relation to the overall value of your franchise and revenue streams and just money that you've accumulated over the years, and you're going to tell me you can't endure paying players for a prorated amount for half a season and to expand the postseason and sweeten the national TV deal a little bit, probably, and things like that.
You don't have to convince me the owners are pricks. I mean,
but that's what I'm just saying. I mean, I have a hard time getting pissed off at players about this because they're already missing out their money just because an act of God wiped out half the season, and now we're telling them that they have to take even less. And you have to play in the middle of a pandemic and put your health potentially, or probably even more so, your family's health at risk, and whether it's your aging mother who has health history or whatever it might be. That's a lot for me to ask of. Yeah, sure, some millionaires in there, and some guys. I'm not losing sleep for Mike Trout. Let's be very clear about this. But the guys.
And maybe Mike Trout doesn't want to come back and play for 60 days.
Right, and that's the
for some half-assed World Series to make $4 million or $8 million, whatever he's going to make, and he's just not interested. And that's the Roger Dorn thing I go back to. That if that's the truth, that's okay. Come out of the room and say, our union's decided we just don't think it's safe. Not our union wants more of the money, or the owners saying, well, we want you to take less of the money. So whatever the message is, to I don't care. The message comes from the Shield. It's not an Angelos thing or a Manfred thing or a Nestor thing or a Boros thing or whatever. It's they're shutting their thing down, and no one here seems to care, which is a bigger story for me. I'm not looking to assess blame. I'm looking to say what becomes of the stadium. What becomes of my city? What promises did you make 29 years ago that I'm now checking the bill? And if I were the mayor of the city next year or the governor of the state next year, how could I even sell the notion that we're going to give our right arm to John Angelos and give him a neighborhood because Nashville's willing to do that. And that's how the team disappears. It disappears because there is no one here. There is no safety net to save it if somebody else wants it more or if they really wanted to move it. And as much as it's nice to throw out a Twitter feed about how much you love Baltimore and blah, 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 you live in Nashville. The old man's disappeared. There's nobody here running the thing. You're a last-place doormat franchise that, by all accounts, probably would not want to play this year. There's no – if I own the Orioles, I'd say this isn't a good idea. We're not bringing people into the stadium. I'm putting people at risk. I'm not really making any more money. I'm a billionaire to begin with. And maybe this just isn't a good idea. And if that's John's thought, then, let's not play this year. Let's come back and go get him in the spring. And that's cool. And I would accept that. But this is trash. It's pigs.
And the fact that you just mentioned that brings up a point that I hadn't made earlier. We know at this point, based on the statement made, based on how they've dug in their heels, and like I said, I have no problem with it. The players seem pretty darn unified at this point. It seems. Are there some players who, have different concerns or are more worried about the virtuous meaning of not having baseball? I mean, sure, but we have players who have presented a fairly united front. We don't know if the owners are united in this. We've already seen the reports and thoughts and rumblings of whether it's the Orioles, whether it's the Tampa Bay Rays, whether it's whatever small market, self-proclaimed small market, whatever. I mean, we're talking about nomenclature here, but some teams that don't want to play, other big market teams who very much want to play because of their local TV revenue, and so. Of the 30 owners, how many of them are really on board for wanting to play at all, or playing 50 games, or playing 80 games, or whatever it might be? So, again, for me, it just comes back to there's no thought of the big picture here. It's all about trying to avoid losing as much money as possible, and whatever the fallout is from that, who cares in their mind? And I think that's a colossal mistake that isn't going to kill the sport in 2021, but might make it continue to fall to the background. And maybe 30 years from now, we're looking at Major League Baseball like we look at horse racing or heavyweight boxing, which 50 years ago, 60 years ago was wildly popular. Now it's much more of a niche and something that just kind of flickers from time to time. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging to those sports. I have nothing against either of those sports, but They don't own the nation's attention at any particular time other than 3 Saturdays in the spring and early summer for horse racing, and at this point,
well, this has been less than convenient for all of us.
Yeah. So I don't want baseball to become more and more insignificant as time goes on, but
neither did I when I built a sports radio station, an industry, and a life around it. My last name's Aparicio. Neither did I. I never thought it would become. This is the look of pure sadness.
I will say this though, while I certainly wouldn't say I'm optimistic, I don't think it's over yet. Well,
I don't care if they play. I guess that's the point. They come back and they're going to go 21-63, and whatever they're going to be, they're not going to be any good. And I know,
but they weren't going to be before the pandemic.
Of course. I am in the market of I'm not going to a game anyway. They're not going to win anyway. All they're doing it for is the money anyway, and they're not doing it to reawaken some Baltimore spirit because they feel that way about how awesome they feel about us. Come on. So for that, I don't want to be so snide as to say I don't care if they play or not, but I really don't care if they play or not. And that's the worst. That's the indifference of the love and the hate that I talked about in 2006. That I would ever just say, football's starting. You guys aren't relevant. You're not winning. I don't even know who your players are. Nobody knows who your manager is. You've been greedy all summer, all of you. It's the last year of the deal next year. I hope you don't leave town, but there's not a damn thing I'm going to be able to do about it. Literally. Right. I've done all I can do to make you relevant. Literally. I've poured my soul out so that the Orioles can be great and the city can be great and vibrant. Yeah. I see what you guys are doing. bitching about your millions. Yeah, okay, good. Good for you. I'll sit here and try to figure out other things, Hey, man, we're going to get on to Colin Kaepernick, which will be the other thing, and I'll put a purple jersey on for that, all right? How you doing? How's your mom? How's your family? Everybody okay?
Yeah, doing well. I mean, it's different. I mean, I'll say what I said to you. I think it was that first Monday after, NBA and NHL suspended their seasons and Major League Baseball shut down. I mean, I miss sports, but I miss a lot of other aspects of my life. I miss seeing friends on a regular basis. I've seen some family, but I think we're so far into this now. I was talking about this with my brother the other day that I think we all don't really fully realize just how much our lives have changed when you start to see now is, okay, restrictions are starting to be eased, and I'm fine with that, and let's be smart, but let's inch back into our former way of life in some kind of sense of normalcy, even if it's not going to be fully normal for some time. But you realize some of the things that you've almost gotten used to over the last 2 or 3 months that would have been unheard of 4 months ago. So, but all things being considered, I'm doing well. I'm healthy. My family's healthy. So
you doing your DDP yoga, man?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've been stretching in this whole segment. I got a little bit of stiffness in me here, and people are wondering how weird I am. But I'm just trying to get my
yoga. I mean, I think. I love it. I've talked to you about it. We've talked to Diamond Dallas Page at the Super Bowl a couple years ago.
My buddy Brandon, my son's buddy Brandon, got a DDP. Did one of those little videos for him.
Sure.
It was like a gift, whatever they call that thing, cameo or whatever it is. And he was, over the moon.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Diamond Dallas Page, one of the great guys in the wrestling business, and he has literally saved some lives out there with some of his former pro wrestling brethren that he's helped out over the years. And
my wife's doing yoga by Adrian right now every morning. My wife looks so beautiful. My wife, she's come back to life. She's strong and fit and flexible and bendy and beautiful and all and healthy and all that good stuff. So yeah, man, yoga. I've told everybody, and then they closed my yoga studio, Luke. They closed my yoga studio.
Yeah. That's
it's a good thing I got my cat in my mat.
There you go.
And
there
I'm
you go.
fat with a PH.
Your cat and your mat. There you go.
There you go, man. Hey, take care of yourself. Stay healthy. We'll get on to Colin Kaepernick and knees and police and all of that. I've been talking about that a lot at Baltimore Positive, so you can check it out. He is Luke at WNST.net, and I'm Baltimore Luke on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere he shows his shining face from Shrewsbury or whatever they call that little town. It's not really in sort of near Shrewsbury. I'll let him argue that next time. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. We're out in the audio vault 24 hours a day, keeping calm, staying local, and always trying, even in the hard times, to be Baltimore positive.